Have you ever found yourself sitting through just an endless stream of political ads during election season and thought, wait, who is actually paying for all of this? Well, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to unpack the incredibly complex and frankly often hidden plumbing of our modern political system. We're talking about the massive surge of undisclosed funds flowing into campaigns. But more importantly, we are going to look at the huge multi-front movement trying to stop it. This is a battle that is happening right now in state legislatures, at the ballot box, and in the highest courts across the country. Okay, let's dive right in with a pretty staggering statistic from the Brennan Center. In the 2024 federal races alone, dark money hit a record high of $1.9 billion. Yes, that is billion with a B. It's enough to make your head spin. What we're really talking about here is money spent to influence your vote, where the true original source of those funds is completely hidden from the public. Because modern campaign finance rules allow wealthy donors and special interest groups to route money through incredibly complex networks of shell companies and nonprofits, we the public are often just left completely in the dark. But reformers across the country are fighting back, and honestly, they're getting incredibly creative. To understand exactly how these advocates are responding, we're going to look at a four-part toolkit of legal strategies currently being tested. We'll cover resetting corporate power, capping super PACs, demanding transparency, and finally, empowering the everyday voter. Let's get into it. Starting off with our first tool, resetting corporate power. This approach is fascinating because it takes the fight completely away from traditional campaign finance rules and drops it straight into the heart of corporate law. Now, what's so interesting here is how it fundamentally questions the system. Following the Citizens United ruling, everyone pretty much assumed corporations had a constitutional right to spend unlimited treasury funds on elections. But the corporate power reset movement approaches this from a totally different angle. They argue, look, corporations are artificial entities created by the states, right? Therefore, if a state grants a corporation its charter to exist in the first place, well, that same state has the absolute authority to define or explicitly withhold the power of that corporation to spend money in our elections. And we're actually seeing this theory put into practice. Hawaii just enacted a first-of-its-kind law doing exactly this, restricting corporate political influence based on the state's power over corporate charters. Meanwhile, Montana's taking the idea directly to the voters with Initiative 194, which is a proposed 2026 ballot measure to strictly limit political spending by artificial entities. So both states are trying to cut off massive election spending right at the source of corporate creation. It is a bold strategy for sure. Will it hold up in court? Legal experts are watching very closely because it's undoubtedly going to face some fierce constitutional challenges. All right, moving to our second tool, capping super PACs. This is essentially about defanging those massive independent expenditure committees that completely exploded after courts eliminated contribution limits. So, the magic number here is $5,000. That is the strict cap Maine voters approved for donations to super PACs. This is a massive, direct challenge to the status quo. For years now, the prevailing legal interpretation has been that because super PACs operate quote-unquote independently from candidates, you just cannot cap contributions to them. That's what allows billionaires to drop tens of millions of dollars into a single committee. But Maine voters decided to test that assumption. By passing this limit, they're arguing that unlimited contributions inherently risk corruption, regardless of whether the PAC is officially independent or not. But as you know, getting a reform law on the books is really only half the battle. It actually has to survive the courts. Maine's bold new cap is currently facing a major lawsuit tied to a dark money network linked to conservative legal activist Leonard Leo. Opponents of this cap argue very forcefully that it infringes on free speech rights and completely violates established Supreme Court precedents. This sets up an incredibly high-stakes test case. The outcome here is going to answer a burning question for the whole country. Does any state actually have the power to legally defang the super PACs dominating our elections? Okay, strategy number 3, demanding transparency. This approach isn't necessarily about capping the money. It's about turning on the lights, exposing the true sources so you, the voter, know exactly who is trying to influence you. Now, there is a massive legal tug-of-war happening over this right now, perfectly captured by Arizona's Proposition 211, the Voters' Right to Know Act. This is actually currently before the Arizona Supreme Court. On one side, transparency advocates argue that a functioning democracy absolutely requires voters to know who's funding political ads so they can evaluate the message and spot conflicts of interest. But on the flip side, opponents, including GOP lawmakers in Arizona, argue forcefully for donor privacy. They contend that forcing donor disclosure can really chill political participation and expose anonymous individuals to harassment or retaliation just for their political beliefs. Despite the intense pushback on both sides, this push for transparency is popping up everywhere. At the federal level, lawmakers are pushing the Disclose Act to force groups to reveal major donors, alongside the SHINE Act to crack down on hidden interests. At the state level, places like New Mexico are passing laws to specifically close loopholes that let sophisticated political actors route money through shell companies. And watchdog groups are getting involved too. Groups like the Campaign Legal Center and Crew are actively suing the Federal Election Commission. They're challenging an FEC opinion they argue creates a massive loophole allowing campaigns to illegally coordinate door-to-door canvassing with outside dark money groups. The goal across the board? Stopping donors from hiding their identities behind anonymous LLCs and social welfare nonprofits. Which brings us to our fourth and final strategy: empowering the everyday voter through public financing. If the first three tools are about restricting or exposing big money, this one is about actively changing how campaigns are funded in the first place. This totally flips the incentive structure for politicians. Let's look at two of the most prominent models today. In Seattle, they use a democracy vouchers program. The city literally gives everyday residents publicly funded vouchers that they can then donate directly to participating candidates. It's been so successful, voters recently renewed it for another 10 years. Then you have New York State's small donor matching funds model. If an ordinary constituent donates a small amount, the state actually multiplies that contribution using public funds. Why does this matter? Well, it fundamentally shifts a candidate's focus away from hosting closed-door fundraisers with wealthy elites and directly back to actually engaging with ordinary local people. And the momentum for this is absolutely growing. Out in California, a coalition of democracy reform groups just launched the Fair Elections Act, aiming to lift a long-standing state ban on public campaign financing. This is really a direct response to recent cycles where tech billionaires and industry super PACs spent completely unprecedented sums to shape outcomes in state and local races. By letting local governments implement public financing, Californians are hoping to give everyday voters a fighting chance against industries with bottomless war chests. So we've looked at corporate law resets in Hawaii and Montana, super PAC caps in Maine, transparency fights in Arizona, and public financing in Seattle and New York. Which really brings us to our final ultimate question. Will this incredibly decentralized multi-front approach actually successfully restore democratic accountability and defang the influence of dark money in our elections? There is no silver bullet here, folks, and every single one of these tools faces fierce legal and political battles ahead. But as you look at your own local elections, it's definitely worth considering which of these strategies might be the key to ensuring the loudest voice in our democracy belongs to the voters, and not just the highest bidders. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and seriously, keep your eyes on the states, because that is exactly where the future of our elections is being rewritten right now.